project was called Devil's Punchbowl for the lectures. If you guys are going to vacate that table, I'd like to put this over here. I am one of 4 people who started this project. Tonight we're going to tell you about a shipwreck, and we're going to tell you about the Underground Railroad. We're going to show you how we think this shipwreck is connected to the Underground Railroad. Anybody here ever heard of the Rouse, Simmons, or the Christmas tree ship? Anybody heard about that? Like at the turn of the century. It was a schooner, just a regular old wooden schooner, used to carry Christmas trees. They go up to the Upper Peninsula, up in Wisconsin area. They pick up these trees, they come down to Chicago, they go to the dock, the river, and they would hand out Christmas trees to needy people. They give them to orphanages, churches. It's a long time ago, a turn of this, I think 1920s or maybe 30s, maybe a little bit earlier. And it sank one year with all the trees. And today, when you dive on it up north, the trees are still there. They're still on the deck. It's because of this schooner hauling Christmas trees and giving them away that this boat is famous. Otherwise, it would just be a regular shipwreck that sank, and nobody would care. There's approximately 1,700 known shipwrecks in the 5 Great Lakes. About 400 of them are in Lake Michigan. We think that this shipwreck that we're going to talk about tonight is a special wreck. It's not just another wreck. It's right up there with the Christmas tree ship. So there's 4 of us that are primaries in this group. John and Ruth Loftus, a husband and wife. Jim Jarecki. Jim is from Highland, Indiana. John, Ruth, Homewood, and I'm from Park Forest. The 4 of us are not archaeologists. There was an article printed in the newspaper a couple weeks back that claimed the 4 of us were archaeologists. We are not. We never claimed that. The newspaper wrote that. So I'm going to clarify that now. The 2 guys that I just flashed on the bottom, Tom Label and Bob Nail, are archaeologists. Tom Label is going to be working with us in the field this summer. Bob is retired, and he's basically a consultant with our group. We bug him with all kinds of questions. We have 3 other people that help us along, Howard, Megan, and Claire. They primarily do research. This is our wreck. Aerial view. We're going to see more detail about this. It's right off of Ogden Dunes. We're going to show you a map a little bit. We're going to show you exactly where it's at. We think this boat is a schooner, 2-masted, called fore and aft rigging, which means that the sails line up with the long part of the boat, with the length of the boat. They're very common in the 1800s. Usually a work boat. It's kind of hard to see this backside here, but there's lumber stacked across the back of the boat. They were used a lot for transporting products, lumber, grain, homemade goods. It was quite common on all the Great Lakes. That's a little bit about the boat. We're going to talk a little bit about Indiana and its connection to the Underground Railroad. We'll see more about that later. This is William A. Briggs. He died in 1958. William Briggs was born about 10 years after the Civil War. He grew up to be a historian, and we can understand why once you see his background, why he turned out to be a historian. He grew up in a time frame when his family and friends of family would have been around Civil War veterans. They were still young enough, or he was young at the time, they were still young enough to witness American, Native Americans, first settlers, stagecoaches, first railroads. So he would have grown up hearing all of this information from his family. He wrote an awful lot about Porter County, and one of his major works was about 260 pages long. You can find it in some of the archives, but he died before it could get published. We named our project after Briggs. He wrote the following article. We took this from a 9-page document. Before we get into this is Ogden Dunes. US 12, Burns Ditch, entrance to the dunes, Ogden Dunes, all these spaghetti streets. Shore Drive. Just so you know where you're at. I'll read this for you. Lake Michigan was near at hand and water transportation was convenient and safe. Certain boats sailing the lake were also known to be carriers. And what he refers to as carriers is picking up fugitive slaves coming from the south, getting them on board the boat and taking them to Canada. And it is said that they made occasional stops near the Devil's Punchbowl. That is near the mouth of the present Burns Ditch. This area right in here. We'll talk about that later. This peculiar natural formation afforded a splendid waiting place for fugitives when the weather was pleasant, but often the opposite was the condition. So a cabin was built near the beach on a spot which is now east of the mouth of the ditch. A few weeks ago we found out that when this ditch was originally in position, it wasn't straight, that it originally curved. This whole area here is filled in when they put in the steel mill. Prevailing water would come in this direction, so they built the ditch on an angle so it would suck the water out into the lake. So we, for a whole year and a half, were basing the idea that the cabin would be located east of the ditch. Now we're thinking that the cabin is here because the original ditch was curved. So it was a good piece of information to come along. Where are we? Okay, but this was too easily detected by a crowd of slave hunters, which was stationed permanently in Chicago. And finally the rendezvous was spotted. When the boat stopped one night to take on some cargo, meaning the escaped slaves, it was boarded by a gang who overpowered the crew and burned the vessel to the waterline. Until recent years, when the water was calm and the sun was bright, the old hull could be seen lying on the bottom of the lake a short distance from the shore and a few rods west of the mouth of the ditch. The cabin was also burned, and we are told that traces of mortar and broken dishes may still be found if the spot can be located by the searcher. Old coins have been also taken from the ashes. In his story, he's referring to a boat that is the boat we've been investigating. There are no other boats to the east or west of this location. There are a lot of boats that have been recorded in and around Michigan City and over towards Gary, but there is no other boats in this position. That does not mean that this is the boat. That's what we're after here, is to prove that this is the boat in his story, and also to prove that his story is correct. We originally heard the term Devil's Punchbowl, meaning that horse thieves hung around the Devil's Punchbowl. We heard one occurrence of that. Last summer, we found this map. It was put together by a map maker who uses a whole bunch of sources to make one conglomeration of like an all-purpose map. And when he drew his ditch in, he even had his ditch curved. So he must have pulled this from a source from a long time ago. We never really paid attention to that. We kept thinking it was straight. He actually got it right. The next little green area here represents where Ogden Dunes would be today. The little heart-shaped red area, if we enlarge that, you're going to see it's called Horse Thieves Hollow. So this basically confirms the story that the Devil's Punchbowl had horse thieves.
Is there somebody at the door?
Hi, my name is
Is the door locked? It's locked?
I was going to say 10, but... Okay, we just did a lecture at the beginning of the month at Ogden Dunes, the second one. After the lecture, a guy came up and talked to us. He was 67 years old. He said when he was little, his grandparents would take him through the dunes. They were from the area. And he said, I know exactly where the Devil's Punchbowl is, and I will take you there. So the following week, we went, and he showed us. He took us to this area, would be west of the ditch. It was amazing because all of us had walked, oh, this is Lake Michigan now, and this is the shoreline. We've all walked over here, and we looked this way. But we never went in this sand dune area. until we went with him. We just never thought about going back there. And when you go to the highest dune, which would be located right around here, if you were to go to that area, and you would look down towards Ogden Dunes, you would see what's called, what they refer to as a blowout. It's a natural formation, wind, weather, waves, where it kind of eats away at the surrounding dunes, at the trees, right? And it kind of sculpts it out. And when you stand in this high ground and you look down, you actually do see the bowl. And this is the area that he was with his grandparents 60 years ago when they told him the story. They told him it was called the Devil's Punchbowl, but they didn't say why. They just referred to it as the Devil's Punchbowl. Where are we at here? Computers. There we go. These are established routes by Wilbur Siebert. I think his name is Wilbur. He claims through his research, he's gone many, many years. This was published early in the 1900s. The Ohio River's in blue. Main routes coming, the eastern route, the western routes through Indiana. He said there was an alternate route that went up towards Michigan City. These escaped slaves had always, since the late 1700s, been leaving the South, and they were coming north. It was totally disorganized. There was no official movement where they could contact people. The people that they would meet would basically be by chance. They would leave in ones, twos, threes, groups, husband, wife, men, women with kids. They would be on their own. And basically they were always told to find the Big Dipper, follow the Big Dipper to the North Star, and follow the drinking gourd. Head north. At night, keep looking for the North Star, keep moving, you will get to the land of freedom. And they were referring to Canada. Because at that time, Canada had no slavery. Every century, maybe every 50 years, they passed the Bonehead Law in Congress. And this was the Bonehead Law for 1850. It was called the Fugitive Slave Act. It was part of the compromise, which had 5 separate bills, and this was part of 5. They kind of snuck it in with the other 4, like politicians normally do. I don't want to get political, but what it said was slave catchers, the original bounty hunters, could come to your house and say, we're going to go catch this slave. And you would say, well, I got to get my crops. They would say, no, you're coming with us. And if you wouldn't go with them, they would find you. They could put you in jail for aiding and abetting, whether you knew this or not. They could come into your house, search your house, with no paperwork. It was a very one-sided, lopsided law. And if this slave catcher took this gentleman to a court, and you were the judge, if you found that this man had to be returned, you would be issued $10. If you said, no, we're going to let him go, you got $5. So you think which way that you would go. It's totally goofy. But that's the way it was written. As they moved north through Indiana, they were being helped by white folks. They were being helped by free black folks. They were being turned in by white folks for the money, and they were being turned in by free black folks. They had no way of knowing and trusting anybody. It was all by chance. This 1850 slave law infuriated people. It's the law is the law, but they decided we're going to help them anyway. A lot of them got fined, a lot of them went to jail. The Quakers were a big movement. They weren't the only ones, but they were very much involved. Meanwhile, they're moving north to Lake, Porter, and LaPorte counties. All right, we're going to switch gears. Coming to America. Way before this 1850 law, people were leaving, coming from Europe, arriving in Buffalo. They were getting on boats. The boats would take them through Lake Erie, Huron, into the ports, Michigan, Michigan City, Chicago. They were bringing people, On the return trip, they were taking lumber. So it was a perfect method of getting people to and from areas. This was early on, 1840s, late 1830s. Northwest Indiana. Some of the best prime lumber on the planet was right here in Northwest Indiana. I read a paragraph that said from the Illinois border to the Ohio border, from Lake Michigan, 15 miles back, was prime lumber. The whole state had it, but they had prime lumber right along the edge of the lake. For whatever reason, the soil was really good for growing different types of trees, different species. So, when the people moved in here, there were the forests, they set up the mills, they find themselves a river, they dam it, they put in the paddle wheels, and they start cutting lumber. They were sending guys into the interior, and they were chopping down anything that was growing. We came across a paragraph that said some of the trees were maybe 20 to 25 feet in diameter. And there were some forest guys that took an 18-foot pole and put it inside the stump, and they could turn it around and couldn't touch the sides of the stump. Some of these trees were 150, 125 feet tall. And a lot of these guys were anti-slavery people. They hated slavery. This is a modern day shot of Michigan City. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about the Devil's Punchbowl. We're going to talk about Michigan City. This is Trail Creek. In the old days, the outlet was cut straight through. There's a turnaround. In the 1830s and 40s, this break wall was not there. This is 2nd Street. And back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, there were lumber yards all the way to 2nd Street on both sides of Trail Creek. There were warehouses. There were grain warehouses. The Michigan Road was cut from, I think it's Marion County, I'm not sure, way down south in Indiana on the Ohio River, the eastern tip. They cut the road to Indianapolis, and from Indianapolis it went up to Michigan City. It was 100 feet wide, this road. 40 feet of it was actual road, and the other 20 feet was for the trees that they cut down, and they just piled them. They cut it all the way through Indiana, because this was going to be the port for Indiana. So everybody down south could get their product to the lake, get it on the lake, and get it east. Or get it to the trains, one way or the other. Those little yellow arrows represent vessels, lumber boats. We found maps indicating that all of Trail Creek was 3 or 4 or 5 feet deep, right here, back when they were lumbering. And a typical boat needed 9 feet of clearance so it could get in and out. And it didn't have the clearance. So those boats would have to wait out in the harbor. And the lumber guys would take little boats called lighters, L-I-G-H-T-E-R-S, lighters, small boats. They would load the lumber on the lighters, take the lighters out, offload, take off whatever product they might have coming back, and that's how they got their product from here to those boats, because those boats could not come in.
What year did you say that was?
What's that?
What years?
Starting in the late 30s, middle 30s and on. They didn't dredge that
19?
18. And they didn't dredge out Trail Creek until the 1870s late. They just didn't get the money appropriated to finally do it. If you look at this little cut right there, you can see the same cut right here. So this picture right here is taken looking in this direction. This is sometime early 1900s. You can see lumber yards. There's lumber, trains, big business. It's this hill that's important. Here, turn of the century, it's starting to grow back. There's still some bald spots in here. Today, it's all grown in. This hill, Yankee Slide. The picture was most likely taken at that time. See how high up it is? Looking down. Right here, where the power plant is, was a 175-foot, 200-foot hill. Hoosier Slide. Removed by hand. Back by 1910 or 12, it was totally removed. A lot of that sand was sold to make glass products. A lot of that sand went north to fill the beaches in Chicago. Yankee Slide, right here. Very important to our research. Right on the other side of Yankee Slide, right there, was a little village or a little town or a little community. That place was called Hungry Hollow. That's an actual picture of Hungry Hollow. And you can see where these little houses are. There's the high ground. So these houses are somewhere along here. Lumbermen lived here. They also hid fugitive slaves. They could take them. It's a stone's throw away. You could spit all the way over here, get them on the lighters, get them out on the big boats, and send them north to Canada. Now, whoever got to ride a boat to Canada was by choice. If they could put them on a railroad car, that's the way they went. But if slave catchers were watching the railroad system, then they put them on a boat. If they were watching the docks, then they might put them on a wagon. So they never knew how they were going to get there. They got there whatever method was available at the time. Hungry Hollow is also known as the Canada neighborhood. And today, if you drive through Washington Park and swing around in this road and you come to this little cutout area, which is known as a hollow, there's a playground here. People, kids, it's called Canada Park. Back in 1987, there was a lawsuit that was being filed in Michigan City. There was people not wanting this new boat dock to go in because they thought that they would be digging up or destroying where the Underground Railroad met, where they were hidden. I'm going to read you this. There's 3 parts. And this guy's name was Mullet. He was the attorney. He was filing the lawsuit. Although the precise location remains speculative, evidence is emerging to strengthen a claim that Michigan City was a significant site in the harboring of runaway slaves. And we found plenty of that information to back that up. Mullet, who's the attorney, became convinced that the Canada neighborhood gained its nickname because it was referred to as Little Canada by the runaway slaves. Runaways would strive to reach Little Canada in Michigan City so they could be transported to Big Canada. The convergence of US 35 and US 12 made the city a natural jumping off place, Mullet said, for land routes to Detroit and Canada, as well as water routes to Canada. So, Briggs at the top, and his statement is backed up by this guy, Colonel Cockrum. He wrote a book in 1915 about the Underground Railroad. And one of his sentences out of one of his paragraphs said basically the same thing that Briggs was saying, but he said, to a point near where the slaves are escaping, to a point near Lake Michigan, either in Lake, Porter, and LaPorte counties. So, we think the Devil's Punchbowl is the pickup point in Porter County. We think that Hungry Hollow is the pickup point in Michigan City. We don't know where it is in Lake County because we haven't done the research there yet. We've exploited everything we can in Porter County and LaPorte. We are now at the end of the summer when we get through with our excavation. We're going to go back to research and we're going to start looking into the archives in Lake County. Now, just about a month ago, we came across a bit of information that was quite stimulating. We found out that on the Calumet River, in a little community called Roseland, in the Illinois border, there were 2 abolitionists. And across the river for them was a boat, a schooner. And that schooner, we found the statement, said, used to travel along this route to Michigan City and go back. So, we're going to go check into the Lake County archives. We're going to go to the Roseland archives. We're going to go to Chicago archives. And we're going to see who owned that boat. Now, you have to remember this. After 1850, nobody in their right mind would write any of this information down. There were no written records. We picked up 6 slaves and we took them to Canada. That never happened. Because 1850 was the Fugitive Slave Act. You get caught, you go to jail. You even wrote it down when you did it, and you could be fined. Our problem is always uncovering solid evidence. That's why we don't take one occurrence for what it's worth. We always go back and find a second occurrence or a third occurrence. Right now, we're one location shy of saying that Briggs' story was true. We found many references to Briggs being an up-and-up guy, a good historian. This is not the kind of guy that would make something up. And the problem is that Briggs probably heard that story from somebody. Let me tell you this way. In the early 1980s, my dad told me, we were sitting around talking one day, and he said, you know, back where we lived, we grew up, 47th Street in Western in Chicago, southwest side. He said, you know, there was a gypsy camp there. And I must have got puzzled, like, I'm trying to think, you know, the restaurants here and the soda parlors here. And he goes, no. When I was young, he said, he was born in 1902. He said it was a gypsy camp there. They lived in wagons, horses, and then they kind of were there for a while and they moved on. Now, my dad told me that story. So he saw it, he told it to me, I told it to you. Now, if nobody writes it down, and somebody wants to go do research on gypsies on 47th and Western, they won't find anything written down. But it doesn't mean that the story didn't happen. And there's a good chance that Briggs heard this story about the boat. It was a verbal story, which means there's nothing written anywhere. Maybe there is. Maybe it's in somebody's basement. Maybe it's in some shoebox from some family. Now, over the weekend, I got email from some people, relatives. I don't know where we're at here, somewhere in this area. Christman's was their last name. Benjamin Christman. He was involved in the Underground Railroad. And she said that was my great-grandfather. She read our article from one of the lectures. She contacted us and wanted to talk more about whatever history they have and so forth. So, see, we're stirring up some interest from people. We're hoping that somebody will look into maybe some personal family records and might find something about this incident. Okay, we're switching gears. We're going to finish this up. We're going to talk about the work that we've done on the wreck. We're going back to Ogden Dunes. There's Highway 12. There's only one way in, Hillcrest. If you don't have a map, you'll get lost. Again, the ditch. The ditch is on private property. There's a fence located here, so you can't get across legally. And the fence kind of comes around here. So that's our wreck. We'll see a bigger picture of it later. It's sitting facing basically north out into the lake. About half is in the water, half is in the sand. And that red arrow is the approximate position. And this is the old shoreline right here. So before the mill was put in, the water just used to stream on by, heading west. Everything we did on the wreck, we did to archaeological standards. Even though none of us are archaeologists, we did it by the book, A to Z, top to bottom. We're going to be up against, when we write our report and we're going to send it to the state and the archaeologists there, they're going to scrutinize it. So we're making sure that everything we do is top-notch work, and so far we have. We measured all diameters, we measured angles, we measured widths, we numbered each, what's called a feature. We numbered each feature. We have photographs, we have sketches, we have drawings. We didn't take any video. That's about the only thing we didn't need. But we have a complete record on paper and on digital formats. It was low tech. We had no money. We're spending all the money that we have. It's personally funded. We have no grants. We have no money. So whatever we can muster together, we use. Using all these low-tech methods, we were able to come up using a computer, taking all that information, all our sketches, measurements, drawings, and take it to an AutoCAD program and draw a highly accurate representation of the wreck. You're looking at the wreck from a bird's eye view. The water line, shoreline, John's actually somewhere near the bow. This is north, that's water, this is sand in this direction. The wreck is approximately 90 feet by approximately 20 feet. We call it the Alpha wreck because when we got into Briggs' story, we were not sure how many boats we'd be looking at. So we figured we'd call it Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta if we found more boats. But so far we're stuck on Alpha because we think, we haven't proved it, but we think this is the boat. It's a typical boat built for the 1800s, frame first construction, which means after they lay the keel, they start putting these heavy-duty frames in. Once all the frames are in, they start to put planks on the outside and on the inside. This was at the Hourglass Museum, which is their historical society over at Ogden Dunes. Big chunk of wood in the back room behind the table. Nobody knew what it was. Nobody even knew when it got there. It's been there a while. You can see it's got some iron rods sticking out. That means wood would have been on both sides. And this piece, we're going to talk a little bit about what this means, but there would have been some other wood in front of it. As soon as we saw it, we knew what it was. It was either a deck hook or a breast hook. On the left, grayed out, that would be a deck hook. They all come in different shapes, basically the same function. Sometimes there were more than one hook, depending on where it was. If it was at the top, it was a deck hook. If they were below, they were breast hooks. It just means that after a while, these were hidden underneath the boat. They could have one or more. If you take a look at the very front of this hook, you'll see these three holes. They're pronounced trunnels, spelled tree nails. Why, I have no idea. But it's a trunnel. Size of the hole, the diameter is approximately 1 1/8 inch in diameter. When you go to the charts, and there are charts, they tell you sizes of pieces of wood. This would indicate that this trunnel at 1 1/8 inches would be for a ship around 200 tons. Lloyd's of London published a lot of charts that people made boats by. Lloyd's of London would insure a boat for about 15 years. They figured after that, it's not worth it anymore because it's getting old. But a lot of people, whether they insured it with Lloyd's or not, would build the boat to their specifications because they knew if they built it that way, it would be a strong boat. Right now, that's telling us we're around the 200, 250 foot, or 250 ton range. This is a guy putting in a trunnel, not on a hook, but he's just taking planks against the timbers. They drill a hole, take this big, hard piece of oak. Sometimes they lube it up, and they beat it into the hole. The hole is undersized, just a little bit. And you beat this piece of wood in, and as it's going in, all the little wood fibers on this side are bending, refusing to let the trunnel come back out. Once moisture hits this hole, after it's finished, driven in, cut them off. Once moisture hits it, moisture hits wood, it swells. It'll tighten up that trunnel inside the timbers, and it locks it in. It was a poor man's version of a nut and bolt, just as effective. We found tons of square cut nails. Wrought iron, handmade. This is about 6 inches long. The heyday for these between 1830 and 1890, so that's kind of telling us that this is an older boat, not a 1900s boat, because after 1890, nails became round. This has a square top, square shank, chiseled end. They normally drilled a little hole in there, a pilot hole, and pounded these things in. They use square nails because square nails do not want to come out like a round nail. They hold better. A wood floor today, if you want to spend the money, they'll give you square nails. It'll hold the floor, it won't squeak. So they're still using square nails, but not a lot. This was conserved. We put it in a special machine, kind of like a sandblaster, except instead of coarse sand, with little plastic pellets, because the plastic will not eat away the metal, but it will take the rust off. So you end up with a pristine looking piece of metal. A clinch bolt, pronounced clinch, written clench. These guys, I don't know why they do this, but 2 pieces of wood. They would clamp it together. They use huge clamps, 2, 3, 4 foot clamps. They clamp the wood together, get it nice and tight, so the surface of this wood and this wood would mate. They drill a hole, pound a rod in there this time, instead of a trunnel, an iron rod. Near the very top, we found these all over the road. When that rod would stick out, they would put a little, what looked like a washer, or kind of like a little donut, little round part on the inside. They peen it out, smooth it over. That top end up there, be nice and kind of looking like that. That was taken from the wreck of the water. So they would use trunnels in certain cases. They would use iron rods in certain cases, depending on where the moisture was. They both did the same job. you could afford to put these underwater. They try to keep the trunnels kind of above the water. Same thing with the nails, but not always. When we go down and excavate, we'll be looking for these for the first time, because now we want to go down below the sand level. They're called scarfs. It's a fancy name for taking two pieces of wood and putting it together. This is a boat. This boat is moving through the water like this, not quite like that, but it's going up and down. It's turning. And it's turning and going up and down. And after 15 years, a lot of these joints get loose. So they would cut fancy little shapes. These are called nibs. They go from very simple scarves to very complex scarves. Sometimes they cut a hole right through here, drive wedges to force the wood, lock it in place. They clamp it down, drill some holes, put in clench bolts. They would do that in strategic locations when they couldn't find a piece of lumber long enough, so they'd take two pieces, scarf them together. When they would be done, it would be like one piece. It'd be as strong as one piece. Right next to that clench bolt that I showed you that was underwater, we found a rod that was threaded with a nut. Very similar to this one. This is taken on dry land, but it's a very similar in construction. Today, and this started in 1841, the standard. It started in the UK. The guy's name was Whitworth. He ran around England. He said, okay, some guys are taking 1 inch, and they got 10 threads. The next guy has 5 threads. He said, we got to get it together. We got to have certain diameters with certain threads. And he came up with a standard. That standard turned out to be for a 3/4 inch rod that you would have 10 threads per inch. That's what we use today. When you go to Home Depot, you say, give me a 3/4 inch rod or nut or a bolt, you're going to get 10 threads. And that means for every inch that you measure, you can count 10 little ridges. That's all it means, 10 threads per inch. The Alpha Rec had a 3/4 8, which is telling us that this rod was probably threaded before that standard kicked in. We don't know when it kicked in. It could have kicked in the 1850s, 1860s, so it's not conclusive proof, but at least it's pointing to an earlier boat. And we need an earlier boat to make it the Briggs boat, but it's not proved yet. What we did do is there was a smart guy with us. He took some clay underwater and he made some little impressions. A few months later, somebody came by and they either took that piece of wood, ripped it out, or the waves ripped it out. And I don't believe the waves ripped it out. I think that somebody, kid probably come by, jerked on the wood, and floated away, or they put it in the basement. It has that rod on it. And had I known that, I would have taken the piece of wood off right on the spot, had I known that. But I never yank on anything, I leave it alone. Because we could have cleaned up that threaded rod. We could have made a perfect mold, or we could have cast resin in there and sent that out to people who understand rods and get their opinion on when it might have been made. But we can't do that anymore because this was made with just modeling clay, and if you stick your finger in here, you'll ruin it. But it's better than nothing. But that's the only proof we have. We have 8 of those impressions. The residents at Ogden Dunes are keeping an eye out for this wreck. They're patrolling the beach, as they say, when they're going out walking, and they're keeping an eye on it now that they're aware of the importance of it. So here's the wreck sticking out of the sand. University of Chicago, Tom Ladle shows up with, that's Tom in a white hat, Russ Quick, his assistant. They're bringing a proton magnetometer, which is a very fancy metal detector. Russ has got this digital gadget that's collecting the gear. And basically, that's me, Ruth, and you see a couple of white tapes. And what's happening is Russ is going to walk from me to Ruth. The two of us are going to move over 1 meter. He's going to walk back. We're going to move a meter. He's going to walk back. And he's going to cover the whole area with a grid. They went back to the lab. They took their digital readout, made a print. They took these black lines, marked it in, because remember, it's looking for metal. It's looking for threaded rods, it's looking for clinch rods, it's looking for square cut nails. any other metal strapping that might be involved. And they lined the boat based on the blue hits. Now, this is a bad print, so disregard these. But here, stern, bow. We're showing heavy, center, heavy, bow. If you take our picture, put it right next door, they're identical. We've been able to take our picture and overlay it, it matches exactly. So the one on the left is showing you the wood, the one on the right is showing you where the hidden metal is. Now you can see from our drawing, we never had a stern port side, because it was under the sand, but they found it under the sand. We don't know how deep it is, probably 3 or 4 feet, but we know it's there. From the very first day that we came and looked at the wreck, if you stand back here and you look at this wreck, you'll see this is very symmetrical. And there's like the shoreline right here. And then all of a sudden, this part is not smooth anymore. It's cocked. And I always said from the beginning, this is broken off. And I figured it had to be broken off because this side is missing. I figured it's got broken somewhere, or this is laying over here somewhere, because we really surveyed the whole area. So it's very useful to get this done by UIC. There's the wreck looking as it does from the beach. We are going to investigate the upper port area, or the upper bow area. That's our number one, eventually our number one area of interest. We're not sure what would be up here. Could be a divided area with starboard chain and port chain. They're called the chain lockers, where they used to put the chain for the anchors. There was another device that was a windlass. It used to turn this way and would pull the rope ups. Maybe a windlass, maybe chain locker, maybe all of it, but that's a lot of metal. Whatever it is, there's a big chunk of it up there. Second area, we have no idea what it could be. Maybe it's a center board. Great Lakes schooners had a slot in the bottom of the boat with a special trunk, a container, and a crank. And they can take this big board, maybe as big as this white area, and lower it to the bottom into the water, like a modern day sailboat would have. It becomes a keel. Then when they would come into shallow areas, they would crank it up, and they could come in shallow. They were called center boards. That may be a center board trunk, the container, because it would have a lot of metal on it. We're not going to be fortunate to dig the whole boat up. We're going to see a sample of another boat. We're going to dig in little squares, maybe 2 meters by 2 meters, 6 by 6. We'll work for a couple, 3 days, fill it up, and then we'll move on for a while. That's what happens when you don't have any money. Now, this is the actual winter shot from not too long ago. And we call this the nub. There's the nub and the frames, right? A big pack of ice. The water's so low, the ice was not only on top of the wreck here, but it was in the wreck. And when ice shifts, it rips the boards up. And we have about 8 boards that surfaced on the beach. And the citizens there are keeping an eye out for that, and they accumulated all these, took it to the Historical Society. And we found some very, oh man, I couldn't do that. We found some very important boards. There we go. We found some very important boards that show us construction techniques. Now, if you're dumb enough to walk out to the edge of the ice and take some pictures, and I was the second one to do it, not the first one. He showed me the way. When you jump out of an airplane, the first one that goes out is a wind dummy. Find out how the wind goes. Well, the ice dummy went first, Jim. And he says, if I go this way, you can see the bow, right? Because the bow's out there, the other side of that little mountain of ice. So I went out there, took a picture. And that is our front of the boat. And for the first time, if you stood and looked down, you can't really see it from this picture. You just can't penetrate it with the camera. But by eye, you would see that it's maybe 6 or 8 feet deep, which normally that's not. The sand is right there. So I was able to see that that wood curves. And if you see a typical construction from a bow, there are curved pieces involved. So we do think that that is the bow. Wow. You just touched this thing and it's crazy. Okay. All ships have deck beams. Right here, right across the top. There are many of them, all the way from the front, all the way to the back. They all hook on a little piece of wood, on a piece of wood called the clamp. They all rest on a piece of wood. If you draw an imaginary line from tip to tip, you'll see that there's a gap in here. It crowns. The wood is not bent like that. They actually cut the wood on the crown, so there's no stress. If you break a piece off, it looks like that. That was one of the pieces that surfaced a few months ago. It's part of the deck beam. And they cut this curve along the edge. It was well done too. And it's very round. Now what you're looking at here is the side. The top is laying over. There's nails sticking out of it. We'll talk about those in a second. This edge is round, all the way, the whole length, on both ends, underneath and on top. Why would you do that? Why would you make this edge and the inside edge round? Anybody take a guess?
You don't hit your head.
So you don't hit your head. Because you'll only have a little knot instead of a big knot. As you whack your head walking through here on a sharp piece of wood, it'll hurt. Very ingenious. I didn't realize that they did that on boats until I saw this. The very end of that piece is a very goofy looking cut in it. It's called a swallow's tail. Normally, there would be, what you see here would be here. If you looked at it from the top, it's like a swallow's tail. This hole represents a clinch rod. And when the ice moved this baby, it ripped it right out, because the grain of the wood is going this way that's weak. It must have just pulled it right up through the rod. The rod went right out. The rod's still somewhere in the boat. We actually were able to go in and look at the mating holes on the ship where these things fit into place. Now, for some reason, they only have a half of the swallow's tail. Still don't know why. We also have parallel row, about 12 or 13 square cut nails. Those nails would hold the deck plank on. 2 nails per plank. We're about to pick up this wood this weekend, taken from the museum to John's house, and we're going to do a complete study, photographs, drawings, measuring, analyze it, try to find out what everything means here. We're going to be able to determine, with the spacing of the nails, how wide those deck planks were. And because we know how high these are, and they were usually put down below the surface of the wood, we'll be able to figure out how thick the wood was. We'll go back to the Lloyd's tables and confirm that this boat is of a certain tonnage. 50 years ago, a guy was walking on the beach and he found a left and a right half of a figurehead. Now that's 4 inches here. So the total is about 7 inches or so. It's 2 pieces come together. He did not know the wreck was there because the last couple of years the lake level has been down. So normally that wreck is covered in chest deep. Last couple of years we could walk out there. So at the time he found this, when he was a kid in 1950, so God, it's over about 60 years ago. He didn't know what it was. He just thought it was in the sand, so he picked it up, took it home. It was in his house for a while before it cracked in 2 because it was wet. He took it into a dry house, popped it open. That's why things need to be conserved. So I hope that somebody would take that piece of wood and put it in their basement because it's probably all busted apart by now. And that rod is probably rusted. We took it to a couple of people. They looked at it, lumber people, and they said it's made out of red oak. That's their opinion. It's rift sawn, which means that the tree stump, the timber, is cut a certain way so they can get to a part of the tree that has very well-defined grain, so you can carve it easily, even though it's oak. It's painted, we're not sure, there's just a few flakes of paint left. Another woman found this in about 1988. She was walking through the water. Lake levels were low. It's a shovel handle, it was out near the bow. We still have to conserve this. What we can make out of it is very old looking, and it looks like it was handmade, not something like at Home Depot where it was stamped out. It looks like someone bent the metal. You can put a wood piece in here for a handle. There's like a clinch bolt that runs through it. We'd like to get it x-rayed, see what that looks like on the inside. So we're starting to turn up articles because we have been giving lectures and people are giving things up. So hopefully we're going to get more of that in the future. This is a wreck that is in Canada. It's very similar to our wreck. The only difference is their boat is parallel to the shore. Ours sticks out. Okay? You take our boat next to their boat and you look at the angle of their boat, it matches the angle of our boat. Usually when a boat sinks, it does not sit flat. One way or the other, it's going to tilt until it hits the sand. This unsupported side, unless more sand should fill in, eventually these deck beams will get weak. Waves, water, ice, depending on how deep it is in the lake. And this whole section is weak. This is the turn of the bilge, and it will crack. And we think on our wreck, it cracked. These are very steep compared to the rest of the timbers on the ship. It's very clear to see that this portion right here is right where the deck beams met. We know that. We can see that. But on the other side, we think we're looking at, let's see if I can, be this way. This is right here, and that is somewhere in here, maybe even lower because of that extreme angle that's in here. So until we excavate, we can't tell for sure. When they did this Canadian wreck, they found a couple items. That's why it's important to excavate. They found British military buttons, American military buttons, clay smoking pipes, and a distinctive bayonet. What kind of boat do you say that is? Maybe. Military boat, right? Okay. They weren't sure because you can't say it is. It looks like it. We need to get to our limber boards, just like they did. This is the keelson. All these planks are permanent, except for the row next to the keelson. They can be removed. Those are called limber boards. There's your frames. They would have a big pipe sticking up with a pump on the top of the deck so they can clear out the water that's accumulated in the bottom of the boat. They removed the limber boards and they found all of this. But they were puzzled. Why would you find British and American buttons? Doesn't make sense. So they did their homework and they found out the following. Before we get there, I want to point this out. This is called the mast step, the mast step, S-T-E-P. It's a square hole, rectangle hole. Mast is round. They would cut the bottom square, fit it into that hole so it wouldn't turn and move. It's a mast step. Normally when they build a boat, they would take a coin and they would put it in the hole, then put the mast in for good luck. We hope that when we excavate, we find still intact a coin in each hole. We think there's two masts, there should be two coins. They found out this was a General Hunter, a British ship from the War of 1812. When they had all those artifacts, they were able to go back to the record, piece it together, and prove that this was a General Hunter. But they also found out in the records that the Americans captured the ship. So that's how both buttons got into the bottom of the ship. It counts here. You guys can dig on solid land, soil. You can have a dozen people stand around this hole. Nothing will collapse. When you start digging deeper holes, you have to make a trench box. You have to support it. Because look at these guys are way down in there. You don't want this soil for some reason to collapse on the workers. We're going to, we should have one more picture there. There it is. For some reason now, or not some reason, for us, we're going to have to fight water. We're going, as soon as we get down about a foot in the sand, we're going to be flooded in the cycle. And this is the Canadian ship. They were running sump pumps continuously to suck the water out. When you watch all their pictures, you see all their pictures, they had to put concrete blocks along the shore to stop the waves from coming in. Otherwise, it would just come in and flood the area. So we're going to run into, it's going to be a nightmare. We're going to run into a lot of problems. That's why we're thinking of working in small areas so we can contain the amount of water. And it is a common technique to surround the hole or the unit with sump pumps. Turn them on, and you suck the water out of the hole in the middle. You got to keep them running, keep the water out. As soon as you turn them off, the water will come back in. We try to scoop it out of the hole. I don't care how fast you are. It was stupid trying to pull it out. You could keep bailing all day long, and the water is still there. We're going to do a comparison study. We're going to dive on the Pat Herner, which is near Michigan City. It's in 25 feet of water. It was built in 1846. It was lost 1854. We don't really care when it was lost. We care when it was built. There's another one, the Louisville, built in 1851. Those are two we're going to go look at for sure. We want to go down with the threaded rods. We want to go down with the trundles, the iron rods, so we can come back with information to match against our boat. We know that was made in 1846. Does it have 8 threads per inch? There's a bunch of ships that we can look at on the list that go into the 1860s, the 1870s, the early 1840s. By the time we look at all maybe 8 ships, we're going to have a good database which to compare to. That is called seriation. And all that means is we have a complete set of examples that we can compare to. It's an old technique. So, we need to find out the last pieces of the puzzle to prove our story. Even if we had a document that said Briggs' story was true, even if it magically appeared on a scroll in a jar like Indiana Jones, we still need to prove that our boat is that boat. And we need to find out who the owner was, the vessel's name, when did it go down, who was behind the helm, and was it in fact part of the Underground Railroad. We're going to have continuous updates on our website. It's a new website, so by June we'll be up and running, and we're going to have that little link called Shipwatch, and we're going to be telling you when we're going to go out and dig. So if anybody's interested in driving out there on that day, you'll find us out there. It'll be in a regular schedule. There's not going to be a set time or day. Thank you for listening. Why does everybody laugh? You guys do eat alive and everybody laughs.
Why don't we take a break? I
Yes.
forgot, my wife told me that we should eat this stuff up, so let's get this and then
Yeah, if any of you have
Roger's
any
gonna
questions,
have answer.
I'm glad to answer whatever you have.